Hi everyone, I'm here with a requested video. Sarah Hall asked me if I could do a fantasy recommendation video. I might have done one of these a little while ago. If I have, it's in my recommended reads playlist somewhere. But I thought, actually, I've read quite a bit of fantasy since I last did that. Here's a new recommendation list. There's a lot of books, so I've got my drink. I'm ready to go. First up, I'm going to start off with the obvious. Now, everything I've recommended I have read, so if there's something not on this list you think should be on that list, leave it down below in the comments and a reason why. The Chronicles of Narnia, specifically The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This, of course, is a classic. It's the tale of 4 evacuee children who stumble through a wardrobe one day and discover the world of Narnia, where it is always winter but never Christmas because the White Witch has put a curse on the land. And it's all about good, evil. Narnia gets a lot of stick because obviously it's a Christian parable for the life of Christ. A lot of people don't like this, but when I first read it as a 12-year-old kid, I had no idea of any of that. It wasn't obvious, so this book is not preachy. This book is not shoving something down your throat that you possibly might not want. For me though, as a Christian, I think it's a very good telling of what Jesus does for us. And to be honest, when people say God, it's Aslan I kind of see first. So there we go. The other big classic is The Hobbit by JRR Tolkien. Not as heavy as The Lord of the Rings, a much more traditional children's tale that goes from A to B without too much waffle. It's the story of Bilbo Baggins, how he got kicked out of his door by Gandalf, ended up becoming a burglar for a group of dwarfs and stole a ring on the way. Which leads us nicely into the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or 6 books, depending on how you want to count it, or one big book, which is up there. I'm not even lifting that. But this follows on from the tale of that ring that Bilbo Baggins stole. You don't need to read The Hobbit to get The Lord of the Rings. The one thing I will say about these books, Tolkien was a scholar. He was a linguistics scholar as well, very big into languages. Boy, does it show. These are written at a time when fantasy probably wasn't really a thing, certainly serious fantasy. And to me, they read like historical texts. That might be the problem when trying to get into these. They are heavy. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of sidestepping and tangents. And the fact the appendices are like a third of the last book is just, well, it gives you some idea. They are a great piece of work. They're not for everybody though. Most people would agree they've read it once and that's it. So on that note, if you fancy reading some proper high fantasy, but without the technical feel that Lord of the Rings has, The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding came out last year. Yes, this is a big book. It's a slightly bigger book than Return of the King, I would agree. But a lot of people say that this feels like Lord of the Rings, but for a modern, cynical was one of the words we came across on Goodreads, audience. It's got the history, it's got the world building, but it hasn't got the historical weight that Lord of the Rings has, and that's a good thing because this book is very reasonable. It flows very quickly. You follow a small group of characters, and it's very questionable if they're good guys or not as well, whereas obviously Frodo and crew are the good guys. Aaron and his crew, it's more questionable. Are these actually doing good, or are they actually rebels? What I like about The Ember Blade is it's not stuffy. There are tropes in here, but they're not the usual ones. They don't go the way you would expect them to go. And there are some great film and pop culture references in here that aren't actually obvious until you start reading about it. There's a great scene later on that actually mirrors a scene from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And you are sitting there shouting out the line. It's great fun, it's witty, it's heartbreaking. And unlike Tolkien, Wooding isn't afraid to bump off the characters. So watch yourself. You may find yourself getting attached to characters that don't actually make it to the end of the book. If you like multiple points of view in a fantasy novel, can I suggest The Plague of Giants by Kevin Hearn? This is a very clever way of getting several points of view told to the viewer, but they're all first-person narrative. The way this story pans out and unravels is really clever. It's told through a bard who effectively gets his stories word of mouth or secondhand, and then will tell the story as if he is that person, which means we get to experience several different cultures, several different ways of living and belief systems, and the world in here is really fascinating. There are 6 nations in this world. Everyone is unique and different, and the language the bard uses for each of those nations is very unique, so you don't get lost with which character you're following at any point in the story. I find it very, very clever. It's a very enjoyable read, and there's a whole pile of information in the back of the book telling you particular societal structures or language meaning, and it's brilliant. There's even a map in here. It ticks all the fantasy boxes. I really enjoy it. It's not for everybody because, like I say, it's multiple points of view in the first person narrative, but because each point of view is very distinctly different, I didn't get lost. I really liked it. It's the first in a series, which you will find with a lot of fantasy books. It's not too heavy. So some more high epic fantasies. There is a difference. One is about following a set group of characters. One is more about the huge fate of the world. I can remember which is which though. So I've got Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. A very clever fantasy story that basically has an anti-hero, as far as they can work out, as our main character. The world is really well built. There's a lot of prejudice and questions going on. There's a magic that's kind of like forbidden in here. Very enjoyable. The first of a very long series. So I'll leave a link to the reading order down below to help you. But highly recommended. And The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first in the Mistborn series. I am currently reading my way through this. I'm loving it. The big thing in here, I don't know if I'm following a good person or not. One of the main characters in here it's really questionable if he's actually on the right side. And the magic system in here is unique. I've not read anything like it before, and it's really, really clever. I have no idea if they ever dramatise this, how they would show that magic system. It would take some very clever wizardry to do that. But it's very enjoyable, very readable, lots of different characters. And again, I'll leave a link to the reading order down below for all of Brandon Sanderson's books because he's got loads. But don't let that put you off. The thing about the high and the epic fantasy that tends to put a lot of readers off, particularly newer readers, is the sheer size of the books. Don't let that be a factor. A lot of them are really easy to read. They don't feel like heavy, big books, unless it's Lord of the Rings. So, you know, the ones I'm recommending to you, yes, they're big books, but they're easy to read. They're easy to get through. So at no point are you sitting there going, I'm never going to finish this book. You can. It may take a bit longer, but you can finish them. If you don't feel quite ready for the whole big adult fantasy world, here's some YA books to try. The Last Namsara, I'm not going to butcher her name. This is a YA fantasy book that has dragons, forbidden magic, forbidden love, a society torn in two, prejudice, slavery. It's got it all, and it's really well done, really entertaining read. It's the first in a series, I want to say. I think it might be a duology though. The Cage Queen is out and about as well, which I must read. But I loved this book so much. It's really clever. It's a little bit brutal in places, but nothing too bad that I've read recently. Spellslinger series by Sebastien de Castell. This is book 2, Shadow Black, which we had to go and buy because we couldn't get a copy from our library. This is a very funny, sarcastic, witty adventure story following a young lad who can't do magic. and therefore makes him quite an outcast in his own society. But he comes from a corrupt society, as usually happens in these things, and his life does not go the way he thinks it should go. They're really enjoyable. The set of characters in here is amazing, and certainly the squirrel cat in here in this series, when he turns up, is hilarious. Skulduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy. This is an urban fantasy that involves a dead detective. Yep, that's a skeleton on the front cover. And a young teenage girl who learns to do magic while solving crimes, saving the world, defeating big bads, and dealing with ghouls, vampires, and werewolves. You know, the usual. Told with a great deal of wit and charm. This is a lovely series to read. There are currently 11 books, if I remember right. Most of them you can pick up from the library, but they're very, very enjoyable. Easy to read, so easy to read, and just great fun. If you like your fantasy a little bit more fairy tale, this is Fables by Bill Willingham. Effectively, the fairy tale creatures are in exile. They live in downtown New York and have set up a life for them. It's a comic book series. I think there's about 15 in the series. I haven't read them all. I'm up to about 7. There are several spin-offs. I particularly like Jack of Fables and Cinderella. But if you like your fairy tales but you want to see them in a contemporary setting, this is very enjoyable. If you like your fantasy a little bit more different, the Wayward Children series, this is the first book, Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. These are short little novellas, so they don't take you very long at all. But effectively, think Alice in Wonderland and Narnia. What happens to the kids when they come back to the real world? How do they adjust with being in a magical world? So we follow a group of children who have slipped through various portals at a boarding school that helps to acclimatise them back to our world. They are beautiful. I mean, the book itself is beautiful, but the story is beautiful. The characters are really engaging, and for such a short story, you really feel the emotions in here. The writing is just gorgeous. I can't recommend this series enough. There are currently 4 books out. I think with the 5th one due any minute now. And they're just lovely. Highly recommend these. I'm also going to recommend the Encrypted series by Seanan McGuire. There's several books in that series as well. Discount Armageddon is the first book. If you like your urban fantasy a little bit more Buffy, a little bit more teenage girl in the real world with vampires, werewolves and bears, oh my, the Encrypted series might be one for you. Very witty, very sarcastic, full-on adventure, and some great mythology in there as well. The way that the author twists what we know about mythology to her own ends is great fun. Retribution Falls by Chris Wooding again. Yes, we like him. This is the first book in the Ketty J series. There's only 4 of them, but if you like a little bit more steampunk-esque fantasy, think dirigibles, sky pirates, zombies, yes, you heard me correct, and some really weird, strange going on, political drama, military intrigue, and smuggling, Firefly-esque. This might be the series for you. A misfit group of characters get together on the Ketty J, basically have to keep above the law because they're wanted for a murder that they didn't commit. They were framed, and they end up finding a massive conspiracy going on and have to sort of survive that as well. It's great fun, very witty, very, very easy to read, but there's a lot of sympathetic characters in here, and as the storyline progresses, you really feel for a lot of them. It wouldn't be a fantasy list without Neil Gaiman on here. This is American Gods. Believe it or not, it's actually the only Neil Gaiman book I have read. I have mixed feelings about American Gods, but I can't deny that this is a very, very good book. It is extremely clever for reasons I cannot tell you, for spoilers. It certainly goes in a direction you don't expect it to go. It is quite heavy. It's not a straightforward tale, but when you get to the end, you realise why it's not a straightforward tale. But it's a very clever take on the whole gods in our world, gods walking amongst us, and how gods use us as well. That would be a key thing. I'm going to recommend it, but I would say if the idea of reading a book this big scares you, probably start with something like The Graveyard Book or Neverwhere. Two of his other books. Neverwhere I've actually listened to as a radio adaptation. It's very, very good. And The Graveyard Book my husband has read and said it's really strange, really kooky. He really enjoyed it. And then finally, my Terry Pratchett recommendations. Known for writing the Discworld series, of which there are over 30 books, plus the spin-off series. Terry Pratchett is a really easy way to get into fantasy because he's covered just about every subgenre you could have, from magic to politics to vampires, werewolves, crime, mystery, you name it, his books cover it. He has satire in there as well, so there really is something for everyone. I'm going to start off with some of the stories that you could start with. The We Free Men is the first in the Tiffany Aching series, aimed at the YA audience. This starts with Tiffany being 11. We meet the Nakmak Feegle, a group of blue pixies, who end up sort of adopting Tiffany as their hag. And that's not an insult, she's a witch. Guards is probably my husband's favourite Discworld book. This introduces the Night Watch, so if you like crime in a fantasy world, pick this up. Very entertaining, a misfit group of characters who end up creating Ankh-Morpork's first police force. And dragons. Wyrd Sisters, this is the first in the Witches series. Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Og and Magrat. Three very different characters, and they're not witches in the usual sense of the word. A lot of the Witches stories kind of take the mick out of traditional witches and what's expected of them, and it's very, very funny for that. The sight of Nanny Og in red shoes and stripy socks is amusing. Reaper Man. This is the Death series. Yes, Discworld has a death with a capital D. He also speaks in capital letters. Think Christopher Lee. Yeah. In this one, Death has decided he's had enough. He's not going to go and collect the souls anymore. He's gone, which causes all sorts of problems. And going postal, this introduces Moist von Lipwick, a con man who has to make the post office work. This is highly entertaining, has been dramatised as well by Sky and was done really, really well. I really like Moist von Lipwick. He's very entertaining and just wants to get out of this situation he cannot get out of. Does that help? Some fantasy recommendations. Bit of urban, bit of steampunk, bit of classic, bit of high, bit of fun. And like I said earlier, if there are any fantasy recommendations that I've not said that you think should be on this list, leave them down in the comments below. Try not to spoil the book, just give us a reason why you think we should read them, and I might go and check them out. There are so many fantasy books out there. I appreciate it is really hard to pick a few on where to start. But basically, if you like the sound of the synopsis, pick it up and give it a go. There is no shame in putting a book back because it's not for you. Game of Thrones, highly recommended by loads and loads of people. I've read the first 2 books. It's not for me. No, just no. But I know loads of people really like it. They like the multiple point of views. They like the bleak, grim nature of the world. Fantasy is a huge, huge genre. It's not really a genre on its own. There are so many different things that make up a fantasy book. So you will find something that you will like in there. It's just knowing where to look. Down below in the description box, I will leave a link to a small booktuber. Please go and check them out. And my social media links and my book blog links where you can find more ramblings from me. As always, thank you very much for watching and happy reading. Bye.